let's look now at why the original claimant in this case, Claire Zurek, had chosen to start legal proceedings. The facts are that Mrs. Zurek had entered into a commercial lease with the defendants. To be precise, she rented a building from them called the Hayloft, which she ran as a coffee shop. For several years, all seems to have gone well between her and the landlords, who were the Hipwell family. Now, Claire's coffee shop targeted a particular set of customers. She named her cafe Mocha Mamas, and her target market were parents with young children, and even parents-to-be, whose babies weren't born yet. And her idea worked. She'd identified a group of people who appreciated a place to meet where perhaps the noise and disruption caused by very young children wouldn't be a problem. However, as you can imagine, safety was a big issue for the customers of this particular cafe, and Claire Zurek was well aware of that. So when the use of an electrical appliance resulted in a fire one day, she was very worried indeed. But when she reported the electrical fire to her landlords, they directed her to the entire agreement clause of the lease that she'd signed. As usual with this type of clause, it stated that every contractual term agreed between the parties was contained in the written contract. And guess what? There was nothing in the contract stating that the landlord was responsible for the safety, maintenance, or repair of the electrical wiring in the building. Soon after the fire, an electric socket in the wall of the cafe started producing blue sparks every time something was plugged into it. For Claire, that was enough. She closed down her business and vacated the premises. And she informed her landlords that she saw them as being liable for the financial loss she had incurred as a result. That loss came to a total of £22,750.
The landlords immediately referred Claire once again to the entire agreement clause. After all, Mrs. Zurek had signed a legally binding agreement, and that agreement stated that all obligations were contained within its pages and nothing else was included. The landlords just weren't going to accept liability for her loss at all. So what else could she do? She sued. And despite the presence of the entire agreement clause, she was successful, both at the first hearing and in the Court of Appeal. Both courts ruled that the contract contained an implied term, not expressly written in it, which said that the landlord was responsible for electrical safety. Mrs. Zurek was awarded the full amount of her claim, plus interest and costs.
The lessons to be learned from this case are to word entire agreement clauses as carefully as you possibly can, and to bear in mind that, despite your best efforts as a lawyer, a contract contains both express and implied terms. Gaps in drafting are always best avoided, and where there are gaps, an entire agreement clause will not prevent the courts from filling them.